Are you fascinated by unsolved mysteries that hit close to home? Sins of the South, 3 Oklahoma cold cases by victim advocate Raven Rollins, dives into a trio of haunting crimes from around the state. From a deadly New Year's Eve for Shauna Jones and Henrietta, to Daniel Furr in Ada, whose family still questions if they truly found his body, and Sheila Davini, whose Maysville house fire was initially ruled accidental but later amended to homicide. Sins of the South is available now in paperback, ebook, and through your favorite library app. Find a retailer at ravenrollins.com. Then check out Sins of the South, 3 Oklahoma cold cases. Can you help solve a mystery?
Okay, welcome to another episode. Today I have a investigative reporter, an author of 9 nonfiction books, winner of several awards, including the Robert Lexalt Distinguished Writers Award in 2017, the New York Times Editor's Choice Award for The Profiteers and Passion and Principle, and a brand new book out now called The Colony, Faith and Blood in a Promised Land. I have with me Sally Denton.
From chilling novels and psychological thrillers to horror short stories, film and screenplays, to true crime, podcasts, music, and the art of storytelling itself, Dreadfully Yours invites listeners into conversations with the minds behind the stories that stay with us. Hosted by author, audiobook narrator, and podcaster Raven Rollins, each chapter blends cinematic narration with intimate discussions exploring creativity, suspense, and the human experiences woven into dark storytelling. Welcome to the show, where stories linger long after the last page. This is Dreadfully Yours.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being with me.
I was born and raised in Nevada, but I've been living in Santa Fe, New Mexico for about 32 years. But I got my start as a reporter in Nevada and then in New Mexico. And then I went to work for Jack Anderson in Washington, D.C., the nationally renowned muckraker that back in the day everybody knew because he was in 1,000 newspapers. And I went to the University of Colorado, University of Nevada, and then the University of Colorado, and then embarked on my journalism career. And it was then a reporter also after Washington in Lexington, Kentucky, which led to my first book, The Bluegrass Conspiracy. I was an investigative reporter at the CBS affiliate in Lexington, Kentucky. I wasn't an anchor, but I was on-air reporter. And that's where I did all the stories that then led to my first book.
So is that how you heard about your first book?
Well, I did all the reporting, and I did all the reporting on air. And it was about a group of drug traffickers who were basically the sons of some of the wealthiest families in the state of Kentucky with connections to law enforcement and politics. And it was a very controversial series of stories because it led up to the governor's mansion and to the state legislature. And so it was very controversial. And ultimately, the TV station, WKYT TV, ultimately they got rid of me. And because they were under so much pressure from these powerful families and said basically fake news, etc. And then a couple of years later, the main character that I had been writing about, Andrew Thornton, parachuted with 80 pounds of cocaine on his back and basically vindicated the entire series I had done. So that's when I decided to write a book about it.
I did read that one. That was the very first one of yours that I read. And I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. So if you haven't out there, if you haven't read The Bluegrass Conspiracy, I'm telling you, it's wild. It's absolutely wild. And you actually, I think I saw you on a documentary that they had made about this case as well, right?
I can't remember. That's a long time ago. There were a couple of documentaries and that I might have participated. They were not my documentaries or based on my book, but I do remember being interviewed for a couple of documentaries. It was a wild story and got a lot of national and international attention.
It was really wild. And so because you weren't allowed to kind of tell the story that you needed to tell as a journalist, is that why you decided to go ahead and write a book about it?
Well, as I said, they kind of, they didn't fire me, but they eliminated my position, which was the same thing. My position as an investigative reporter, and wanted me to start covering puppy mills or something. So obviously I left the station. And then when I became a private eye in Washington, D.C. for a few years after that, but then when Thornton parachuted, I was approached by I wrote about it for the Washington Post, and I was approached by a lot of publishers in New York that were like, wow, this is quite a story. Would you be interested in developing it into a book? Which I did. And as you said, that's now 9 books ago.
Yeah. But it is a great, crazy, wild ride. So
it's the first and kind of sets the stage for all to come.
So after you wrote The Bluegrass Conspiracy, did you think, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start writing as a career? Or did you think that was just kind of a one-time thing?
Oh, no, I always wanted to write as a career. So after that, that book did really well. It sold about 250,000 copies and still sells today. It's like a cult classic, especially in Kentucky. It's in its 4th or 5th edition. And but I really, I intended to write all along and wanted to write long fiction, narrative, nonfiction, long form, not narrative, narrative nonfiction. And so then I went from that into my next book was called The Money and the Power, about the rise of organized crime in Las Vegas. And it was kind of a natural segue. It turned out that the Bluegrass Conspiracy, there were a lot of connections between that book and organized crime and Las Vegas, which is where I had been raised. So it was just kind of a natural transition from that into a book about organized crime. Basically, I write about stories that I think have been ignored for some intentional reason, and stories that have been silenced. And so I went from The Money and the Power into, which was a heavy lift, a big story about organized crime from the 1940s up until the beginning of the 21st century, which included drug trafficking and money laundering. And, Las Vegas is kind of a fount of that. The headquarters of the black operations and black money. And so I went from there, though, into my next book, which has to do with my current book. But my next book was actually about a massacre in Utah in the 1800s. And even though it's not true crime, it was an unsolved crime. It's where Mormons dressed up like Indians and slaughtered a wagon train, the richest wagon train to ever traverse the United States, and blamed it on the Indians. And so that had been one of these enduring mysteries in the American West, and really a unsolved crime for 150 years. And so that was the next thing I decided to do, was really kind of tackle that crime and mystery from the 1800s.
And you have a whole book about that. But I wanted to ask you, why do you think that event was integral to go ahead and put it in your newest book, The Colony?
Yeah, well, I didn't expect it to. I mean, first of all, The Colony, to begin with, it's about the murder of 3 women, 3 mothers, and there were three women and 14 children traveling on a road in northern Mexico, and they were slaughtered, 3 and 6 of their children. And when I started looking into it and I realized they were fundamentalist Mormons, I initially wasn't expecting it to have anything to do with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which I wrote about. But when I started looking at this case and trying to figure out, who was involved in this really grisly, heinous murder of women and children, and I kept thinking, well, where were the men? They knew this, they had been warned. This was dangerous. It was one of the most dangerous roads in the world right now. And so, why did the men let their women and their wives and children travel it alone, unescorted? And so when I started delving into that mystery, I then went back into I actually have written 2 books about early Mormonism. So I went back and looked at that as it related to polygamy. And then I found that the clan I was writing about, are direct descendants of one of the perpetrators in the massacre from 1857. And that's the reason I brought that book into the current book, to draw a direct genealogical line, that one of the reasons that this clan had relocated to Mexico from Utah in the 1800s was to get out of the way to escape prosecution by American officials for the massacre. I didn't throw it in there just because, it was fun to show I knew something about it.
Right. And like you said, you do have a complete other book, but that had to do with your great-great-grandmother, right?
My great-great-grandmother brought the first piano into the American West as a Mormon convert in 1849. And then when she got there, realized that the church was practicing polygamy, and she felt she had been lied to when she was converted in England. And she ended up leaving Utah and leaving her piano behind. But I have her diary. And so I wrote a book following American Massacre called Faith and Betrayal, which is about her and coming there. And it turns out to be kind of a mystery, too, why she left, where she went. Did they chase her? So all of my books, even though they don't, they wouldn't be thought of as all true crime or mystery, they all are.
Oh, yeah.
Just some of them are historic.
Yeah, I say, if you're talking about true crime, you're talking about history. So
right.
I think that's really neat. Not a lot of us get to kind of take a look into our ancestors' lives like that.
Well, and I brought that one into the new book as well because there's a direct connection to the polygamists leaving Utah in the 1800s and going to Mexico. And I used my great-grandfather as an example of what it was like to all of a sudden, how the LeBaron colony began, how the LeBarons got to Mexico was because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints made it illegal to practice polygamy anymore in exchange for statehood with the United States. And so the polygamists left for a lot of them for the southwestern United States, which was still Mexico, and then into Mexico. So that's directly related as well to the historic context of this clan that I'm writing about. And it's important to distinguish that these women and children that were murdered, the women, they were fundamentalist Mormons. They were not mainstream members of the mainstream church in Salt Lake City.
Is fundamentalist Mormon something kind of you're just drawn to? Because you write about it a lot, and it seems like no matter what you do, you always end up coming back to it.
Yeah, not really. I'm not a Mormon scholar, and I'm not that. I'm interested. I've always been interested in the American West, and I write about that a lot. My next book was on, John and Jesse Fremont. And again, I wrote about them because I thought they were ignored in Western history. And it just seemed to me that a lot, especially beginning with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, so much of American Western history cannot be separated from the Mormon story, the Mormon expansion, the Mormon church expansion throughout the American West. And so it's kind of an accident that when I'm looking at different mysteries in the West, they tend to tie back to the Mormon church.
So I didn't know anything about fundamentalist Mormons when I got into your book, The Colony. And I was so thankful because you offer, it's not just a history lesson for the LeBaron family and you follow them, but it's also, you talk about how fundamentalist Mormons came about, how it started and where it went from there. And that was just so fascinating to me. And I'm really glad you included that.
Thank you. That's the reason I found it necessary to include the history, because the rest, without that context, none of the rest of it makes sense.
And then we follow the LeBaron family down to their new colony, which they called Colonia LeBaron. And you ended up figuring out that they were involved in like everything that you can think of, like blood feuds, the drug cartel, even Nexium. What was it like just kind of uncovering this and peeling it back one by one?
Well, it was shocking. You know, I started this because I heard about these murders, and it was so sad. These women and children that were, you know, unprotected, and it was a brutal murder. There were 100 hitmen. It was so over the top, and it was clear that somebody was covering up something. The Mexican government said it was, you know, a case of mistaken identity, and then they said they were caught in the crossfire between rival gangs. Well, this happened at 10:30 in the morning in broad daylight. Somebody recorded it on a cell phone. They were targeted. One of the cars they ransacked. They knew exactly they were women and children, and one of the cars was ransacked, and then everybody in it burned alive. And it was such an over the top, you know, it would have taken maybe 2 sicarios to kill all those, you know, 3 women and all those children. And instead there's 100. So it was clearly, and I know this from, like you said, I mean, all these books build on each other. I know from writing about organized crime and drug trafficking, and, you know, that this was a message that was sent to somebody. I don't believe that there's any evidence to suggest that any one of those 3 women was actively involved in something that would have engendered that kind of hatred and response from drug cartels. I first heard about it on CNN the night it happened, or the day that it happened, and it was so shocking, and I wasn't expecting to write about this. I was actually in the middle of a different book, but I saw it on CNN, because what I hear more often than anything is everybody saw it on TV and they were shocked by it, and then it disappeared. So what happened? And I, you know, from the moment I saw it, I called my publisher and my agent, and I said, I don't even know what this story is, but I can tell that it's worth looking into. This is, you know, not only is it such a tragedy, but it's obviously in the middle of, you know, why are these fundamentalist Mormons in that area? And so then I started looking into that. But, you know, right off the bat, that day, the day that it happened, before Mexican officials had even gotten to the crime scene, then President Trump announced that his administration was going to designate the cartels as terrorists, and have the United States come in and wipe them out. Well, that didn't go over well in Mexico, and López Obrador, the president, immediately rejected it. And Trump also depicted these women as, you know, American citizens, like tourists that just happened to be in northern Mexico, and this happened. And so it played into his narrative of anti-Mexico and, you know, the crime and filth and blah, blah. And so he jumped in to do that. And it was just, you know, it was almost as if, you know, he was predicting that the administration was expecting something like this to happen in order to use it as a pretext to invade Mexico. And that's exactly how Mexico responded. So then I knew there's some geopolitical aspects to this. Before I even wrote a book proposal or contacted the publisher, I started looking into it and finding that, you know, there was just so much more than met the eye. And the thing to me is there were so many reporters there from all over the world. And they did first class work. The Mexican reporters on the scene and some of the American journalists did a great job, but then it was over. They covered the funerals, and then you never heard about it again. So I was just kind of determined I started with one premise, as I said to you early. My one premise is, why were these women on this road? Why were they alone? Why were they unprotected? And where were they going? And what were they doing? And how did they get there? And where were the men in the rear with the gear? And I, you know, investigated it and researched it and talked to dozens and dozens of sources. And at the end of the day, I had the same question. So where were the men?
And you did get a lot of information from firsthand interviews with some of the women from this community, right?
A lot of firsthand information from the community, people who had left before, people who are still there and are scared. I mean, you can imagine how terrifying. And then, in a polygamous community, it's pretty closed. The women don't have much agency. The first wife has a little bit more power than the rest. She's usually the one legal. Polygamy is not legal in Mexico, just as it's not legal in the United States, but it was kind of grandfathered in the 1800s. And so they haven't been, nobody's really been investigating them. And by the way, I didn't find any evidence that they were targeted either because of their religion or polygamy or anything else. So it's not in that, and from that standpoint, this isn't really a book about Mormons. It's a book about a horrendous crime, and the victims happen to be, an offshoot of the Mormon Church.
Right. You spoke to a lot of people. Were you ever at any point concerned for your own safety?
Well, I didn't go down there after this happened, but I had been down there, through there a couple of times in the past. My parents, our family had a home in Mexico for 30 years, and because of my father's and my own Mormon heritage, we were always interested in the Mormon colonies. And it's not just Colonia LeBaron, which is the fundamentalist colony. There's a lot of Mormon colonies just north of there in Mexico. And Mexico, in fact, has the second largest population of Mormons in the world. So, and they're not all polygamous, and they're not, the LeBaron colony is relatively tiny by comparison. There are, under 5,000 people there. So this is aberrant. This is not your normal Mormon colony. But, so I didn't go down there after the massacre. I don't know. People ask me about, are you afraid? I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, as you said. This isn't my first rodeo, and I've taken on a lot of different controversial subjects. And, my experience is that when if you're devoting your life, as I have, to uncovering unsolved crimes and corruption, political corruption, and unsolved murders, and looking a lot at who are the murder victims, who's getting murdered and why, that usually leads you to a power structure, and they're usually women. So that just kind of comes with the territory, and I'm certainly not alone. There are a lot of really unbelievably brave journalists, and I think Mexico has more reporters killed recently than any place in the world.
How long did it take you when you decided I'm going to do the colony? How long did it take you from start to finish?
Well, the event happened on November 4th, 2019, and I had a book contract within a few weeks, and I started immediately. And I think it was, so it'll be 3 years, I guess, in November. But I was really working, nose to the grindstone. And I think that the pandemic actually kind of helped. And the fact that it was so difficult to get there, there were so many obstacles to me going there, that I really had to reach out and find sources in the United States who had been there, who had left there. I was really fortunate because of my other research that I had a lot of really good sources in law enforcement on both sides of the border, and drug enforcement on both sides of the law and both sides of the border. And then this, when I was really fortunate to tap into this kind of the sisterhood of the multiple wives and offspring of these polygamous families, that obviously you can imagine. I mean, first of all, the LeBarons are claimed to be one of the largest families in the world because they've had so many offspring over the generations, but polygamous families, and 50 children each. So there are a lot of children. There are a lot of disaffected former wives and current wives and children and young men. They've been kind of overlooked, but a lot of the young men, the patriarchs, the older men, take the young women as wives. So there's not a lot of opportunity for the young men who, have been called the lost boys in other journalistic pursuits. And, there's a lot of disaffected young men that have been kind of forced to leave the colony. I didn't say here, and it needs to be said, that, they're also extraordinarily wealthy, and they're sitting with all these extremely profitable thousands of acres of pecan trees, and while surrounded by abject poverty among their neighbors. And so that's what I looked at when I started looking at motives for the murders. It started to be, I had an event the other night, a book event, and I said, by the time I was into it, it started to be like Murder on the Orient Express. It was like, who doesn't have a motive? Who doesn't have a bone to pick with this clan? And somebody in the audience stood up and said, I've read this book, and it has the Murder on the Orient Express is way too tame. This is more like the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, which is, it was before it was over. And ultimately, it's not a whodunit. It starts as a whodunit. It ends as a whodunit. But I present as all of the possibilities of who might have been involved, and either any one of the theories is credible, and then you add to that the combination, the coalitions between people, that yes, the cartels could be upset with the water that the liberals are using, but the Barzanistas and the indigenous farmers that surrounding them, they are equally upset. But the Barzanistas are also longtime natives of Mexico, and many of them, many local farmers have been working for the cartels for 30 years because that's the dominant industry. And as I say, at the end of the story, it comes down a lot to, the conflicts over water. It's a dwindling resource, and all of these enterprises, these are billion-dollar enterprises. The pecan plantations, if you will, the drug cartels, the marijuana, the poppies, the fentanyl, the methamphetamine laboratories, the agave growers for tequila, the avocado growers. Everybody in this region, one of the richest regions in Mexico, agriculturally, everybody is competing for a very finite resource of water. And there's a lot at stake, and there's a lot of violence related to it.
Do you have the same process every time with each book, like the same research process and the same writing process?
I do. And this one was thrown off again because of the pandemic. And in a way, it was kind of a luxury. I was stuck in one place and thrown into, complete 16-hour days obsession with uncovering, getting to the bottom of the story. But generally, of all of my books, they take 3 to 4 years. And I always start at the Library of Congress, which is what I would have done with this one, and find all of the newspapers throughout the world that would have covered it. I always start at the Library of Congress for about 6 months, and that's where I just cull the information. I don't start a book knowing where it's going to end. I usually start a book because I'm fascinated by a subject, and I want to find out what happened. And so I usually spend the first year researching, and then another next 6 months outline. And then I come home to Santa Fe or Nevada, where I spend a lot of my time. And that's when I bring everything and just start going through it, culling the information and digesting it. And then I start outlining it. And then for me, it's really like a recipe, because all of these stories you can go down a rabbit hole. So I set a deadline. Okay, we're done with the research, and this is what the story is. And then when I sit down to write, I've got I could have a 40-page outline for a 300-page book. And by that time, I know exactly where I'm going. Obviously, if something comes up and changes the direction of the narrative, I'll add it. But I've stopped the research and really, coming up with a narrative based on what I have in hand.
When you interview people, do you usually get out and track them down, or do you do phone interviews? And I'm guessing it was a little more difficult to do during the pandemic.
This was a lot of phone interviews. And, I found that there's so many sources that I didn't expect to come out, especially the women. And they were afraid for themselves. And, they're living in a dangerous zone surrounded by dangerous cartels. And this just happened. And so I was surprised. There was kind of a network, somebody reached out to me and made it really easy, because once that person reached out, then there was a connection between, you mentioned there was a blood feud and a murder spree from the 80s that, becomes relevant to this. And so and as I said, there were, these patriarchs in the colony all had multiple wives and multiple children and multiple grandchildren. And it is a clan in the strictest sense. And because of the polygamy, the secrecy, because polygamy has been illegal in both countries for now, moving on to the third century here, the 1800s, 1900s, and 21st century, the level of secrecy is so ingrained, and the fear. They've been, the ones that were raised in polygamy in the 50s and 60s were used to hiding from the U.S. Marshals. And so the element of secrecy and conspiracy and danger is very deep inside this community.
And I feel like I need to throw out here, because this is kind of a myth that I was under the impression as well getting into this. But when we say polygamy in this sense, now they don't all live together wonderfully under one roof. The women and children don't live together. They usually have their own households, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people live, and when it works among them, they claim that it's wonderful to have, they call it a sister wife, somebody to share in the work. And they have their own houses, and the husband, they have different days, when they see their husbands, but then sometimes because often it works out best if the man marries actual sisters, and especially if those sisters have been raised in polygamy, it's natural to them. So there's a lot of different kinds of living situations, some of which work and many of which don't, because you've got the natural, elements of human nature, such as jealousy. And, as I said, the first wife has power that the other wives don't have. And there are rivalries and all of the children belong to the man. And, so it's complicated. It's beyond complicated.
And it's not even like polygamist in a modern sense where, everyone has their opinion, everyone gets a say. It's pretty much you do as the man says.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to the original Mormon church, where all worthy men are worthy of receiving divine revelations from the Lord. So that's pretty hard to, compete with as a woman when, the husband decides that he's prayed on it and gotten, a divine revelation that, you're not going to be allowed to do this. There's no talk about a democracy. That doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Do you see yourself writing about fundamentalist Mormons again in the future? Or do you think, if it takes you that way, are you going to do it?
I don't think so. As I said, I'm not that interested in that aspect of the story. There's a lot, as Under the Banner of Heaven. Yeah, and then, Keep Sweet about the Warren Jeffs I think that's Hulu, isn't it? Or there's the Mormon Forger. That's a relatively new one. There's a lot of Mormon stuff going on right now. And, I wrote American Massacre back in 2004. So it's not like I'm, suddenly on this thing. But no, as I said, I was interested in that as a crime before I even knew for sure that they were fundamentalist Mormons. And it took me a while to research the communities and the relationships between the three women who were killed and their husbands, and, who was practicing polygamy, who was raised in polygamy. They were all raised in polygamy, but, what their marriages were complex. And so, no, I don't see doing that again at all. It's funny to me, because almost every book that I've written, the story finds me at the end. I write for a living. I have for 35 years. I'm really fortunate to have been able to do that, to write nonfiction with advances from major publishers to support me while I'm doing it, which is why they take exactly 3 years, because I'm always out of the money at the end of the 3-year period. But by the end of the period, I'm always starting to think, wow, I really need to, I was raising 3 sons. I got to come up with, what's my next book? And literally at the end of every book I've written, the next book is obvious. It's something that came up in fact, the American Massacre, which I said I wrote in 2004, that came up purely by accident. I had completed my book on Vegas, and the Mormon Church is integrally tied to the rise of Las Vegas. But I had one paragraph in that book about the Mountain Meadow Massacre in 1857. And my editor at Knopf, as he's editing the manuscript, he said, "What's the Mountain Meadow Massacre?" And I told him, and he says, "You've got to be kidding. Why are there no books about it?" It was the largest white-on-white slaughter in American history up until Oklahoma City. And so then I thought, I wasn't looking for a book on Mormons. It was just like, he said, well, Knopf, my publisher, will buy a book on that subject from you. So I thought, sounds great. And talk about an enduring mystery that remained unsolved. So then I was off and running.
So you said when you started the colony, you were in the middle of another book. Are you going to go back and finish that, or are you on to something completely different now?
No, I think I'm going back to that. It's not unrelated. As you said, it was called, I was calling it Expendable Girls. And I was actually looking at murders around the country of murdered women, young women. And I have found in my journalism career, from the earliest days in Nevada and then New Mexico and then Kentucky and in Washington, D.C., that if you start, and I alluded to this early, if you start looking at the murdered women in a place, I don't care what city it is, Lexington, Kentucky, or Santa Fe, New Mexico, you look at the murdered women and you start, and they're usually unsolved. Nobody's looking to solve these cases. And I have found that every city that I have lived in, if you trace the murdered women, you will find who's got the power in that location. Anyway, so that's Expendable Girls, and I think I'll probably go back to that.
Well, I look forward to whatever you do next.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here with me so much. This was a lot of fun. Like there are things that we're not talking about that we need to be talking about, that I didn't even know that the Mountain Massacre happened. I didn't even know about that.
And it should be in every history book in America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I'm really glad that, there's something out there that we can learn about this stuff and, take a look at these cases that you cover as well and kind of go, right along with you, like, what's going on here? Let's dig deeper. Let's figure it out.
And if I might surprise you and write a historical novel next based on some fictional.
Yeah. I was just laying in bed staring at the ceiling, just going and going. And I'm like, what is happening here? I mean, you're talking about, like, 1 second you're talking about drug cartels, and the next second you're like, well, let me tell you about how they mix in with Nexium. And I'm like, what is happening? This is crazy. So very good book. If you guys out there haven't gotten a hold of The Colony yet, please do so. I can say that it was absolutely fascinating to me. Again, I look forward to any other books that you do in the future. If you would like to jump into it, you can find The Colony, Faith and Blood in a Promised Land at a bookstore near you. You can also check out sallydenton.com to learn more about this amazing author. And I will also leave a link in this show description. So, Sally, thank you so much for being here with me today. This was awesome.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of conversations with some of our world's dark storytellers. This story may be over for now.
The next chapter is always waiting to be written.
Until then,
Dreadfully yours, Raven Rollins.